I'm back. Sorry. Apologize in advance for the noise. I'm outside. Again, my internet is not cooperating today. So I am outside in the elements in the Texas heat, but I'm incredibly excited to talk all things Little Monsters with one of my all-time favorite authors, Adrienne Brodeur. So welcome everyone. I hope you brought your questions and your books, because I am incredibly excited. So hello. All right, there's Adrienne. So let's see if we can make this happen. Hi.
I'm never quite sure that's going to work.
I'm in thinking mode. I'm always like, if I push it, is it going to accept? And my internet's terrible. So I know. I'm glad that we made this unsocial network connect.
Excellent. Your background looks beautiful. Where are you?
Thanks. Well, I'm in the Texas heat. It's a reflection of my backyard. It's my living room. I think it looks a lot nicer than it is because it's very, very hot.
Well, I'm coming in from a Westin hotel, so.
Where are you?
South Carolina.
Oh, wow.
That's still on tour.
Very cool. Yeah. Well, that must be so exciting to be on tour for this book, because I don't think you were able to tour with your last one.
I actually was lucky enough to have a bit of a runway with the hardcover of Wild Game. It published in late 2019, and then, like everyone, got sent home on March 20th.
Yes. So you didn't get the full...
Right, exactly.
Yeah, well, that's a bummer. Well, I'm so excited that you were able to take some time today with your newest book, Little Monsters. You're truly one of my all-time favorite authors and writers. I just absolutely love your work and your ability to, have such a beautiful framework for families and different dynamics that can seem very chaotic, and you're able to just write so beautifully and messy at the same time.
Just like families, right?
Yes, exactly. But it's such a hard feat to be able to accomplish something like that and really get the reader to, I have such a visceral response to writing. So if you don't mind, actually, I'm sure that most people on here have read your book, but just in case, would you mind just giving like a little synopsis of Little Monsters?
Not at all. So for those of you who've also read my memoir, you know that I'm obsessed with family secrets. So it should come as no surprise that Little Monsters is full of them as well. So Little Monsters is set in 2016 on Cape Cod, and it follows this very small, very tight family, a father and his two adult children. And at the start of the book, everything seems like it's going great for the Gardner family. The patriarch, Adam, is about to turn 70. He's a famous marine biologist, and he's on the brink of this massive discovery about humpback whale language. The son, Ken, who's 41, has just sealed a real estate deal that's kind of catapulted him to a new stratosphere of wealth, which is going to enable him to run for Congress. And the daughter, Abby, who's 38, is about to be discovered, has finally found her voice as an artist and is about to be discovered in a big way. So at the beginning, you just feel like, wow, everything seems perfect and grand. And very quickly, and not surprisingly, you learn that things are not quite as they seem. So the patriarch Adam has gone off his bipolar medication in the hopes that once his mind is unanesthetized from the drugs, he'll be able to sort of connect the dots of this whale theory he's having. And Ken's wife, Jenny, has discovered him doing some untoward things online. So she gives him an ultimatum of therapy or divorce. And Abby has started painting works that are very, very of a very personal and revealing nature about her relationship with her brother, and they're about to have a much wider audience. So you sort of see all these dynamics coming into the forefront, and they're all set to collide at Adam's birthday party.
Mm-hmm. Um, I love all of these different dynamics, and I love how you. It's almost like they're floating along the surface, and they're just about to bubble over at the culmination of the birthday party, and it's like the calm before the storm, and I I would imagine that most people reading this, because I don't think that there's any family that's normal. I think all the secrets in all relationships in some shape or form. Um, and it, when you're deep in it, you can see the chaos, from the bird's eye view and the reader's view. It doesn't, it's you could watch this chaos unfold. I'm wondering what that's like for you as an author to write and orchestrate this chaos. Is that something that just kind of comes naturally? And maybe chaos isn't the right word. Maybe it's more of like, I don't know, a cacophonous symphony, or something of that nature.
Right. I actually, perhaps because it was fiction and not examining my own family this time, I had a pretty great time with it. And one of the things that I really wanted to do was take this kaleidoscopic look. So I went into various different characters' heads and deep into their heads so that I could kind of shine a spotlight on a real family and that we could see the deeper truth inside. And I tried to do it compassionately. I mean, life is hard with all its complexities, and we each live in such a different space. And I think sometimes we assume we have an idea of what's going on in the next person's head, but we're always wrong. I mean, I think we're always wrong. So what I liked about having such a sort of close point of view for each of these characters was that really the reader knew so much more than any of the characters. They were all kind of thinking, well, I'm going to do this because they're feeling that. And when you hear enough of them, you're aware that, that just none of them are getting it right.
Yeah, well, I feel like I watched an interview that you did where you talk about the characters being a sort of iceberg, where you only see that tip of the iceberg. And I feel, and I was talking to my husband about it, who we just keep talking about how beautiful your characters are, and how your approach, or what, again, I'm probably wrong, it's perception, but the approach to writing it seems similar to how maybe we approach our craft in acting, which is that you only see so much of the character, but you have to create this really rich life. What is that like doing? How do you do that as an author and in your medium? And what is that revision process like?
Right. That's such an interesting question. Of course, I have no idea how someone like you would sort of internalize and embody a character. And I'm sure it is probably a similar skill set. You start with a sort of superficial idea of who your character might be. You've got some ideas, but for me, it's not until I put characters into situations and just explore how they would react, what they would do, what would be the response, get them in a conversation with the other characters in the book, and sort of write into it in order to understand it better. I mean, I think the iceberg analogy, I've probably overused it at this point, but I mean, I think it's a really good one because, you do only see the tip either on the stage or in a book. And what the author and or actor needs to know is you have to have such a full understanding of who the person is in order to just distill it into a gesture or a sentence or a paragraph. And how would, if you know your character really well, you're going to know how they respond differently to their cousin than their friend, or any of those types of things. And I think, much of, again, now I'm just extrapolating and guessing that it's similar for acting, but I mean, I think much of writing is about compression and distillation and knowing someone's history and then just showing it briefly somehow and not necessarily even in words.
Yes, and that's what's so amazing is the way that the characters interact. And I think that's what's so beautiful about this sort of kaleidoscope approach is that you can see how the characters are interpreting these moments and then watching them play out. Um,
Yeah.
it's so wild as an actor. You don't necessarily get that until you're in the room and you're playing around, and it's very different. Um, but you do it so beautifully with you know showing and telling at the same time. It's really such a joy to read. I'm also wondering, in your approach, there's clearly a lot of research that you really make look so effortless, but there's so much woven in about oceanography and pelagic, am I saying that
Mm-hmm.
correctly? Um, and also with mental health and psychology and psychiatry. I'm wondering what that was like for you too, because each character is so distinct and so rich and so alive. What was that like, or how did you
I
approach
mean, I really love research. It's wonderful and fun, and the beauty of writing a novel is you get to pick exactly what your characters are doing. So obviously, I am fascinated. I entered this world fascinated by marine biology, fascinated by whales. I live part-time on Cape Cod, and I see the humpbacks migrate up, and have been in their presence. So it was just wonderful to take that a step further. And of course, the more I found out, the more I wanted to share. In fact, I felt like I had to restrain myself from like shoehorning in every whale fact I've ever learned and picking, some of my favorites, which are like the fact that they have pink milk or the bubble nets that they create
it?
or, how rich whale falls are for the environment and our whole planet. Um, in terms of mental health, I mean, I am someone who fully believes, we're all on various spectrums and points, and I think we can all relate in some ways, even if we don't have a mental health crisis, to how we do or don't medicate ourselves with our glass of wine or our, whatever we do. Um, but I do have mental health issues in my family. I've also seen a lot of bipolar disorder up close, and it is, varies wildly from person to person. There are incredibly high functioning people with the disorder, like Adam is, who aren't necessarily, when they're in a manic phase, feeling like they're able to fly or something, but there I actually had this experience where I was with a person who I didn't know well, who was in a manic episode, and she was staying with me for a few days. And the way in which her mind could just like pluck out facts and weave them together, and I mean, it was nothing short of astonishing, especially because she was a very rapid cycler. And when I saw her a few days later, I mean, she was missing that. She'd already come down, and it was just heartbreaking for her to sort of have had that access and the feelings that go along with the grandiosity and those, we all feel good when we're feeling on top of our game, like you just did something amazing. And to sort of resume normal life as a normal person, not able to quote Shakespeare and, on and on.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that was a beautiful ride, and I with Adam,
Mm-hmm.
um, and I feel like you really. I felt like I learned a lot about oceanography and as well as mental health and particularly bipolar disorder, and to really flesh out the character, to really that the disorder didn't own him. That was just
Yeah.
part. Um, it was very beautiful. Um, um, I want to talk a little bit about family secrets.
Okay.
and I love how you write them from different perspectives. I'm curious about how you leaned into those secrets, and I'm also wondering if, and not that this is probably a little separate than the secrets, but is there a narrator that's maybe a little bit more reliable than the others?
Is there a single narrator who's more reliable?
Yeah.
Well, I think in some ways, so I didn't, when I gave you the synopsis, I didn't introduce this one character, Steph, who's an outsider. I mean, I'm assuming most people have read it, but I don't want to give away a spoiler to anyone. But she comes upon the family and she is seeing them much more from an outside perspective. So I think, I think they all vary, as all humans do, in terms of their narrative reliability. I mean, um, you know, that's just the thing. None of us are totally reliable because we're all seeing things through our own lens. But the Steph character, I think, is more is if there is a character who's sort of a substitute for the reader, who's looking at these people and the situation, the embroilment from a sort of more dispassionate outside place, that is Steph.
Yeah, I could see that. I really loved her window, and I don't want to give too much away, but I thought that was an excellent way to have a very different vantage point of the family dynamics.
Yeah.
That was really fun. Um, that window being said, there's also that interesting climate of the 2016 election that's also going on, which I funny enough, was pregnant during that time with my daughter. And
Oh,
just remember the hope and the anxiety, and I really feel like that's woven throughout the book. You can just sort of feel this bit of a humming, this excitement and anxious time. Did you always have that in your mind?
yeah, that was one of the things I knew about the book almost before I started writing it. So it's so interesting how one comes upon a project, or how one finds the space. And for me, I spent a lot of time thinking about that period, that moment in time, sort of preceding the election, when there did feel like there was just this uneasiness in the country. It was, I had to actually go back, when I didn't start writing this book until 2020, but, to go back, because I was like, had Me Too happen? Was that before, after? When did Harvey Weinstein fall? Just to sort of remember those bullet points. But it was all right before that huge tidal wave, hit. And, but I remember sort of feeling or observing, as writers do and actors do, the behavior of people, particularly that summer. And I just, I think there was, I mean, you put it so well, that humming, there was an anxiety, there was a moodiness. I think we knew the ground was shifting and we didn't know how necessarily. But I thought, in particular, from my observations, I felt like the people who had traditionally been in power, white men, were particularly the most anxious. And I saw some pretty bad behavior that summer. Just, for instance, the scene that takes place on Ken's property on his deck when he's observing the young women, that actually is something, a variation, that I did witness out on the beach one day, where some people that I knew well, and when I say that, I mean these are, well educated, well meaning, et cetera, people I've known a long time. And I did overhear one of the men in this party refer to a girl of 15, I mean, he was in his 40s or 50s, as jailbait. And I just remember being like, what? Like, what did he just say?
Yeah.
And it was said in such a casual way, because in my youth, that would have been a throwaway line. That would have been just like, ha ha ha, yeah, jailbait. That's just like a cute girl.
Yeah.
But it doesn't mean a cute girl. It means you would like to screw her, but you're scared of jail.
Yeah.
And I think there's this way in the world now where you can't actually, and thank God, speak that way about women. And you know, I, I don't think it was okay in 2016, and I certainly made a made a statement about it in real time then. But I definitely think that those people wouldn't have made the same mistake now. Like the world has become sharper about that, and it's our daughters are going to be in a very different place,
Yeah.
which is wonderful.
Yes, exactly. Well, and that is so interesting now that you say that, because there are some very deliberate um, characteristics or behaviors that Ken, for instance, sort of brings out, and that's an interesting, now that I'm thinking about it, with the backdrop of the election and the lashing out. You know, that was a time where it obviously went in one direction, but that direction gave people permission for a little bit to behave like that. And
Yep, yep. And I thought it was also like I remember not realizing that what Jenny's reaction was going to be. You know, Jenny is Ken's wife and Abby's close friend, and you know, she kind of just played it off in the old boys will be boys way, and we all saw that play out as well. And yeah, it's just it was a time.
yes, it was. And I love that she has her moment at the end
Yeah,
where she's
yeah.
able to evolve with it, or not evolve, but have her moment, I guess.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I think you know, I was very interested in, I am interested in the power dynamics between men and women, and I am interested in women finding their voices and how and when that happens. And at least, you know, I think part of the novel is about women finding their voices.
Very much so.
Yeah.
Um, well, speaking of finding voices, you have such a strong presence and such a strong voice in your art, and you are, as a fellow artist, what are your early forays into writing?
Oh, I mean, you know, I think I've always been in the literary world, or always, you know, since my late 20s. So I think I've always had a big curiosity about it, but also because are we both still on? Yes, no, I just saw something flash, so I just didn't know. Um, so I've always, because both my parents are writers, I've always had a hesitation. They have been both, you know, positive and negative. Anyway, you know, we all distance ourselves from our
Yeah.
parents. In any case, I I think I've been interested in writing for most of my life since I was a young adult. But the story that was really captivating to me was my memoir, my mother-daughter story. And so, of course, I had to figure out how to find the right voice to tell that story. And that was very elusive to me. I mean, you know, when I think of the development, and I think, you know, I processed what had happened to me for a long time. And for the viewers who don't know, I mean, I essentially was my mother's wingman in her extramarital affair for years and years. There it is. So, and so, you know, at different points in time, it was like, oh, this could be a romantic comedy. You know, I think as you're finding your voice, you know, humor often masks pain. I tried to fictionalize it, and it was just sort of a veiled memoir. And it wasn't until I had my own children that I realized I just, you know, that book was going to be straightforward in my own voice as memoir. Um, and this novel, although I find fiction much more challenging than memoir and nonfiction, I mean, challenging in different ways. Memoir isn't challenging because it's, you know, so personal, and the publication process, you feel very, very exposed. But fiction is more challenging because, you know, you don't know who the narrator is, you don't know the plot, you don't, you know, the whole world is an open book. Um, but I really enjoyed writing this book and being able, I mean, it's all about the creative process with fiction, and that is, you know, it's a terror and a joy.
Sure. Well, and it feels, I think you referenced, is it kintsugi,
Kintsugi, yeah.
kintsugi, which I know is wabi sabi. I was like, this is very wabi sabi, and then I had never heard of kintsugi. But it is. It's that beauty of all these pieces and bringing it together that I feel like you do so well with Little Monsters.
Mm,
And Wild Game as well, because it's personal and it's vulnerable.
yeah.
I feel like bringing all these different pieces together is
And
really.
also in and of itself, I mean, we all are so flawed,
Mhm.
and that is humanity, by the way. And so why not embrace it? Which isn't to say not try to improve, not try to find the beauty, all of those things that are so important, but not to not to dwell in the shame of screwing up or having flaws or making mistakes. I mean, we've all said something terrible to someone we've loved. We've all done the wrong thing at different times, but you know, that's what life is, and it's all about having a consciousness about it and moving forward.
Yes, and your books are all about moving forward and that process. There's never a dull moment or a lull where there's, you know, like a droll moment, and it's constantly propelling, like life is, no matter what, if you have
Yes.
a moment or not. I mean, characters who have such, you know, they're all so flawed. They always are constantly moving forward. Even Ken, who's in therapy and obviously is trying to right his wrongs in the end, even though he's like, you know, eaten alive inside with his own stuff. And it's so beautiful. And you, sorry to go back, but just talking about the difference in your two books and their vulnerability, did you feel that one was more vulnerable? Do you feel like it's more vulnerable to talk about your own life, or do you feel like it's more vulnerable to create a life and go, here's my baby?
Unquestionably, I felt more vulnerable writing about my own life, and as I said, you know, it's easier. I didn't have to guess at who the characters were, and you still do research. You know, you still, one of the things that was beautiful about writing that book is in walking in my mother's shoes and investigating her life. You know, any character that you become involved with, you find a well of empathy for, and so it was very healing to me in that way. That said, if I've ever had a terribly anxious period in my life, like more anxious than ever, it was before that book came out. Now granted, there were other things going on in my life. I was moving out of a city where I'd lived for 25 years with my family. My mother had become terribly ill and had just entered hospice at that time. So there were a lot of other things that were going on. But when you write a memoir, you know, about a deeply personal relationship, you realize that people are not only going to judge your book on its literary merit, they're going to judge your life. And that felt terrifying to me. That said, almost immediately, I mean, that was the, you know, machinations of my imagination. Almost immediately when the book came out, and it, you know, the fear was gone. I mean, I don't know what I'd been imagining, but when people responded so big heartedly, and even if they didn't have my experience, they could relate to either sort of the perpetuation of family dynamics or having a super powerful parent who dominated them in some way. So then it became really joyful to talk about and to explore. But there was a period of anxiety that was, oh my God, nothing I ever want to repeat.
I mean, I can only imagine what that would be like. But I will say that the more people that I talk to, because I've loaned this book or I've bought Wild Game for so many of my friends and family. I absolutely, I mean, I read it probably within a day or two. It was so moving and good and hard, you know, but
Hmm.
relatable, because
Yeah.
we are all so flawed as humans and our relationships are very flawed, and that's kind of what makes us special and unique. And so I
Yeah.
felt like while I didn't have this experience, I had different experiences and with different parents or, you know, siblings, family members. And so I found it really moving and relatable. And so I'm thank you for your vulnerability. I'm sorry that it was so stressful, but hopefully.
Well, and I'll say that is where what I'm most interested in characters, whether it's memoir or fiction, is it's all about the gray zone. It's not about, when I wrote Wild Game, I remember consciously not wanting to write a mommy dearest with a villain and a saint or anything like that. I wanted really to explore um, just the gray area. And there was a quote I used, which I'm going to have to dig out of the recesses of my brain right now because it's been a long time since I talked about Wild Game. But it was a Vivian Gornick quote in which she said, um, in order for the drama to deepen, you must show the loneliness of the monster and the cunning of the innocent. And literally, I remember reading that and thinking, that's what I have to do in this book. And likewise, I feel like that's what I wanted to do with Little Monsters as well. I didn't want to make Ken all big, bad Ken, and Abby or Steph all sweet, great. I'm not interested in heroes and villains. I'm interested in what's good and bad in all of us, what's courageous and corrupt, we all have both sides. And that is to me what's fascinating.
Absolutely. I feel like they all had their own beautiful recipe to them that was extraordinary. And your books, both of them, that I have here, Wild Game, Little Monsters, I know you've written more. But food and recipes are a big part.
Yes.
It's like farm to table, seed to table sort of vibe, which also gives a very visceral and in a sort of temperature or feeling to the environment, because you're sourcing your food like in Wild Game, Little Monsters. You can tell, you can feel the Cape, which I've only been to once, but
I'm
you give
back.
me, I would like, it sounds amazing. I had the best time, and we keep talking about wanting to go back, but especially in your stories, you feel the saltiness, and I feel like I taste the food.
Yeah.
I know that you have, reading Wild Game, a background, or you've been obviously around food a lot. Is that something that you love to bring out in your books, or do you cook? Like,
Well, the truth is, when I wrote Wild Game, I mean, one of the things that I wasn't expecting was everyone to say, "Oh my God, you're such a great food writer." I mean, I love food. I mean, I'm definitely not one of these people who ever misses a meal. When people are like, "Oh yeah, I just forgot to eat lunch," I'm like, "Who are you?" Because that would never happen to me. But I did grow up. My mother was an amazing chef. She studied at Cordon Bleu. She wrote cookbooks. So very much our life centered around my mother in the kitchen, and not sort of, in some sweet little apron in some back room, but in a kitchen that was, the center of the house. It was where the action took place. But I mean, writing is really about noticing. To me, that's what it's about more than anything else. And describing, like how something feels in your mouth, how something, how it smells, how it sounds, how it, you're really trying to give three dimensions to something you're putting into two dimensions. And so I enjoy writing about food. I enjoy writing about the Cape. These are things that I just look at so closely and notice so carefully. I mean, I also feel like I have this almost Pavlov's dog reaction to going over the bridge on the Cape. You just are hit with that brackish air. I mean, it's very humid, as I imagine where you are right now, but you feel like you can chew that air practically, and the sounds and the smell of low tide and the sounds of the birds and the gulls, which are so different than, even just 20 miles away as you're driving, you just hear different bird sounds. And then on the Cape, it becomes those shore birds. And it's beautiful.
oh, well, I love your description of birds. I think Adam calls them the SUVs, or the altering baby creatures because they can dive and uh, rummage for food and fly and do
Right.
all the different terrains. And then going back to food, I think it just is so telling that you're talking about the details about like noticing the details, and every character has their own relationship too with food, which I just love. Like Adam, you can see when he's having his grandiose sort of mania moments, because then he goes back down and he gets his appetite back, which he talks about, or Abby's uh, inclinations towards certain foods, and you can see when, and how she maybe ate before and how she's eating now, and all the characters and the relationship, Steph's relationship and cooking, and how that's like a love language, and
Yeah.
I love it so much. I love it so much that I'm really drawn to books where there is food
Me
prevalent.
too.
I love book memoirs about cooks in the kitchen, like Ruth Bryce,
Yeah.
Singing Plums or Alice Waters. Are there certain books that you like to gravitate towards, or are you a certain kind of reader?
I read a ton, as most writers do. But I also used to be an editor. So, in my editing world, I was mostly editing and reading literary fiction and literary memoir. I also love poetry, as you were talking about, the type of writing I wanted to say, I don't know if you've ever read Mary Oliver, who's a
Of
Cape
course.
Cod, yeah, Cape Cod poet, but she has this great line which I think of as advice to writers, which is it's a very short poem. Pay attention, be astonished, write about it.
Mm.
And I really think that's all of it. Now I totally lost track of your question when I
No.
went off there.
What kind
Oh,
of
what
writer?
kind of books do I gravitate toward? So I run an organization, a literary organization called Aspen Words, and we give out a prize each year, which is for a work of fiction that shines a spotlight on a social issue. So I read a lot of those types of books, especially as our prize is sort of getting to a long list and a short list and ultimately the winner. But I read fun stuff. I read junk too. I'm not just all reading high literary all the time. I love big commercial stories. I like some stuff that I can just, get swept away in. I love big family dramas. Yeah, I read very non-discriminately.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Everyone should.
Yeah. Well, and I think also as a writer, you get so much information from the way different writers work. So, something you'll see in a very commercial writer is just how they get you from place to place to place, and just, I don't know, these propulsive plot lines, which I am interested in. And then, poetry for just the sound of the words and the pleasure and the music of the prose. But there's value in all of it.
Yeah, absolutely. Even YA too. I
Yeah,
I love.
totally. And I think, books books can really change you. I mean, they not in sort of like TV huge change, but just in these ways in which your perspective can shift slightly. And when you're in a book, I think the magic of being really deeply in a book is that you are in a world that's not your own, that you're alongside characters who you may not know. So whether you're in the antebellum South or in, I don't know, 17th century Paris or whatever, you let go of your own brain and you enter a different world, and that's so important for compassion and empathy and just being able to see worlds other than your own.
And you can do it from anywhere.
Yes. Nice point.
I love it. Well, is there anything else that you would like your readers to know?
Oh, just that I'm grateful to them for reading and talking about books and sharing them with people. And I really, didn't say this at the beginning, but I am so appreciative of being on this book club. I love the company I'm in. I watch the Lisa Taddeo and Elizabeth McCracken. You've got such great people on, and thank you for helping support writers.
Oh my gosh, thank you. It's such an honor. Again, I've been a huge fan of yours and for so long, and I love everything that you're doing, and I really look forward to following along, and hopefully you'll be writing a new one soon. I'm really
Thank you. Thank you. I'll definitely get on that. And then for the readers, if you feel moved to rate and review books you love on Amazon and Goodreads and so on, it actually makes a big difference for the algorithm. So please do that for all the books you love. Thank
thank you.
you.